Good evening and welcome to another edition of Midweek Matters. We are closing out second quarter this year. It ends on a particular interesting note. We've been discussing and studying the wisdom in the Old Testament, and the last couple of weeks we've been dealing with King Solomon. He is credited with the book of Proverbs. He's credited with Ecclesiastes, and the last book that we're looking at takes a little bit different turn, but it's all dealing with life. Last week we talked about how life is short. This week we're actually taking a little bit different venture, and we're talking about love and marriage. Now, if you stop and go back in Genesis chapter 1, verse 27, God gave a specific direction on mankind. It says, "And God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female, he created them. And God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply." So we're looking at Song of Solomon, and it's basically a love story. But a lot of times theologians and commentaries have said that Song of Solomon can actually be an allegory. And I had to look that up because I wasn't sure what they were talking about. And it says an allegory is a story or a poem or picture that can be interpreted to reveal a hidden meaning. Now, as you read in Song of Solomon, you see the love story between a man and a woman, but you can also see the relationship of God and man. So we see here, key verse says, "Many waters cannot quench love. Rivers cannot sweep it away. If one were to give all the wealth of one's house for love, it would be utterly scorned." And that's found in Song of Solomon 8:7. It says, two books in the Bible never mention the name of God, but he stands in the shadows on both. One of those books is Esther. The other is the focus of today's study, Song of Songs or Song of Solomon. Some have treated Solomon's song as an allegory, searching every phrase for hidden clues about God's love for us. The book delivers a powerful message when it is simply allowed to speak for itself. It candidly but sensitively extols the love between a man and a woman within the bonds of marriage. And in that love, we see the wonder and the beauty built into the most intimate of relationships by our Creator. Dennis Kinlaw has reminded us history began with a wedding and it will end with one. The phrase Song of Songs is a Hebrew expression meaning the greatest song, just as phrases like the King of Kings and Holy of Holies means the greatest king and the holiest place. To the Hebrews, the greatest song ever written was a love song, but not a sentimental Moon and June kind of love song. It was a celebration of marital love inspired by God himself. In section 1, it says there is an intimacy in love that draws one partner to another. And this takes up in Song of Solomon, chapter 2, verses 3 through 7. "Like an apple tree among the trees of the forest is my beloved. Among the young men, I delight to sit in his shade, and his fruit is sweet to my taste. Let him lead me to the banquet hall, and let his banner over me be love. Strengthen me with raisin, refresh me with apples, for I am faint with love. His left arm is under my head, and his right arm embraces me. Daughters of Jerusalem, I charge you by the gazelles and by the does of the field, do not arouse or awaken love until it so desires." The writer goes on and says, in these verses, the maiden who narrates most of the poem yearns for the one to whom she has given her love, the one to whom she will give herself after their wedding. She remembers his embrace. His left arm is under my head, and his right arm embraces me. She thrills at his past public displays of affection for her. Let him lead me to the banquet hall, and let his banner over me be love. She is lovesick. I am faint with love. It's almost too personal, isn't it? We don't want to intrude on her privacy, but she wants us to know the depth of her love and devotion to the one who has won her heart. In fact, what she's feeling is what she was created to feel. Human sexuality is God's idea. The second thing said about us in the Bible, right after the fact that we were created in His image, is that we are sexual beings. Male and female, He created them. Satan has tried to warp and pervert this aspect of God's creation, and he has certainly succeeded to a disturbing degree. Still, the right kind of intimacy is undefiled, and the ideal of marital bed, in the purity of its union, remains one of God's most beautiful gifts. He asked a question here. It says, what examples of romantic love in the Bible illustrates a proper sexual relationship? And he goes on and gives us a couple: Adam and Eve before their fall, Jacob and Rachel, Boaz and Ruth. And in the New Testament, we find Joseph and Mary, how Joseph stood by Mary through their ordeal as before Jesus was born. Ask another question: how different is our society's view of sex and sexuality from the scriptural view? And the writer writes, he says, the so-called sexual revolution of the 1960s promised to free society of what many consider to be Victorian attitudes about sex. We're still seeing the detrimental effects today in the mind-boggling, anything-goes philosophy of the entertainment industry. And Christian families are not immune to those adverse effects. The contemporary mindset seems to be as old as the book of Judges. Everyone did as they saw fit, and that's found in Judges 17:6. God is the author of sex. As He crafted it, our desire for sexual intimacy not only draws us toward the object of our affections, but also pulls us away from all competitors. In section 2, it says there's an exclusivity in love that calls each partner away from others. One of the things that came to mind as I was reading in Song of Solomon is how it actually lays out the relationship that God's looking for. You know, over in Exodus, in chapter 20, verse 3, we see God telling us, you shall have no other gods before me. You know, so we're seeing God is very personal. He's very possessive. He wants our relationship with Him to be one-on-one. It says, listen, my beloved, look here. He comes, leaping across the mountains, bounding over the hills. My beloved is like a gazelle or a young stag. Look, there he stands behind our wall, gazing through the windows, peering through the lattice. My beloved spoke and said to me, arise, my darling, my beautiful one, come with me. See, the winter is past. The rains are over and gone. Flowers appear on the earth. The season of singing has come. The cooing of the doves is heard in our land. The fig tree forms its early fruit. The blossoming vines spread their fragrance. Arise. Come, my darling, my beautiful one, come with me. It says the lover in Song of Songs calls his beloved away. Arise, my darling, my beautiful one, come with me, he urges. 3 verses later, he repeats the invitation in the same words. That theme is a recurring refrain in this book, appearing in one form or another, a total of 8 times. He isn't just asking her out repeatedly. It's not merely a series of dates. He is calling her to be his alone. Her response in verse 16 confirms it. My beloved is mine, and I am his. And again, we can see a relationship where God calls us to be his. You know, having no other gods before him, that this is a choice that we make. It goes on, it says, not only do they belong to each other, but neither must belong to anyone else. He is the one for her, she is the one for him, and together they will one day become one flesh. In this song are equally committed, equally dependent, equally responsible, and equally ardent. Love like this, shaped by God's standards and grounded in Him, will last. Section 3 goes on, it says, there's an invincibility in love that brings both partners through every difficult together. Verse 6 and 7 says, place me like a seal over your heart. like a seal over your arm, for love is as strong as death. Its jealousy unyielding as the grave. It burns like blazing fire, like a mighty flame. Many waters cannot quench love. Rivers cannot sweep it away. If one were to give all the wealth of one's house for love, it would be utterly scorned. Since this climatic section of Song of Songs has been compared to the classic tribute to love in 1 Corinthians chapter 13. In that famous chapter, love is depicted as patient, kind, humble, forgiving, protecting, trusting, persevering, and so forth. Here, love is strong as death, and will not break under the greatest pressure. Nothing is more powerful or more valuable than love. Because that is true, the beloved says to her lover, "Let me be like a seal over your heart and on your arm." A seal in ancient Israel was a stone engraved with a design and served as a personal mark when pressed into clay or wax. It was used much as we use a signature today. The seal was often worn on a chain around the neck or as a ring on the hand. As its imprint was made on important legal and personal documents, the seal represented its bearer. It's as if the bearer and the seal were one. "Let me be your seal," she asked. "Let me be your living signature. Let the two of us be one." Goes on, the writer tells the story about Robertson McQuilkin, who was the president of Columbia International University in South Carolina. His wife Muriel slipped into an advanced stages of Alzheimer's. One way her disease manifested itself was severe anxiety when her husband wasn't near. Dr. McQuilkin was advised to find a full-time caregiver for her, and so he did. He resigned his presidency to care for her himself. "I love Muriel," he wrote in his letter of resignation. "I do not have to care for her, I get to. It is a high honor to care for so wonderful a person." This is a covenant view of marriage, and it stands in stark contrast to the trial marriages so popular today. Long ago, when Robertson McQuilkin said, "I do," it was for better or worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health. When health gave way to sickness, he kept the covenant he had made in the way he thought love should respond. After all, many waters cannot quench love, and rivers cannot sweep it away. When it is a covenant love, a love like God's own covenant-keeping love. Since 1 Corinthians 13 says love never fails, and Song of Songs chapter 8 says nothing can break or even bend it, how is it then that so many marriages end in divorce? And the writer goes on and says, love isn't at fault. It's the absence of love, or perhaps a faulty concept of love. Remember that the traditional wedding service does not ask, "Do you love?" It asks, "Will you love?" Love is a choice, and subsequently the actions based on that choice. The emotion that often accompanies it is wonderful, but love is much more than a feeling. In Judaism, Song of Songs is traditionally read at the Passover feast. That works for the Christian too. There is no better expression of the value of love than the atoning death of God's Passover lamb, and no richer symbol of the power of love than his resurrection. So keep in mind, even though this is a story about a man and a woman's love, it also gives us a glimpse of God's love, sending his son who died for us. Until next week, have a safe week, have a great week.